This episode is sponsored by Cultivate. Hello and welcome back to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and really all creative people, I like to think, to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 127, List Your Weaknesses. Cultivate a deep understanding of yourself, not only what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also how you learn, how you work with others, what your values are, and where you can make the greatest contribution. Because only when you operate from strengths can you achieve true excellence. Peter Drucker, unquote. So, hello again, folks, and thanks for, in the words of one of my favourite productivity guys, Paul Miners, spending your valuable time here with me. I try not to steal Paul's content when I'm doing these shows, although for sure I've covered some of the same things he talks about. I have found myself more than once saying those words, which always remind me of him. So yes, thanks I give you, and thanks sincerely for checking in with this show once again. And in last week's show, I looked at the Jim Rohn quote, something along the lines of, it's not in front of me, that we become the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. It's an interesting productivity observation, which when identified could be, really genuinely could be, the solution to your problems. So please go back and check that one out if you want to find out more. Today though, I'm looking at another form of high-level thinking as I ask you to assess yourself by listing your weaknesses. This whole episode is kind of a single great call to action, so let's just get into it. What are I don't know what I've put on that accent. What are your weaknesses? That's the question. What are your weaknesses? It's a question that is the staple of many a job interview because it allows your potential employer to highlight your problem-solving strengths and your self-awareness. And employers will appreciate your honesty and integrity. If you try to avoid the question, the interview might end before you get a second chance. So taking this as a productivity exercise, this is really just a way of building your self-awareness on one level. But once you have identified your weaknesses, you can then start thinking on how to make improvements. And I certainly know that as a filmmaker, in that simple sense, I have weaknesses in editing techniques like grading and sound mixing. And I don't have to do a big exercise to identify those weaknesses. I know there are gaps in my knowledge, but are there others perhaps that I haven't thought about? Well, here's a bunch of examples from Indeed.com that you may not have considered, and there's just a few of them. Here they are. I have a hard time letting go of things or letting go of a project is the specific quote. And the quote goes on, my greatest weakness is that I sometimes have a hard time letting go of a project. I'm the biggest critic of my work, and I can always find something that needs to be improved or changed. To help myself improve in that area, I give myself deadlines for revisions and try to avoid making too many last-minute changes. Another example is I have trouble saying no. That's episode 2 of this podcast. It's that important that it was the second episode that I covered saying no. But here's a quote again from Indeed.com. My greatest weakness is that I sometimes have trouble saying no to requests and end up taking on more than I can handle. I now use a project management app so I can see how much work I have on at any moment and understand when I have time to help others. Their next example, and there was loads of examples, by the way, I just grabbed 4 of them, but their next example is, I sometimes struggle to keep a healthy work-life balance. And the quote goes on, because I truly love my work and I'm very ambitious, I sometimes find it difficult to set boundaries between my work and my personal life. I have seen a negative impact on my motivation and focus when I ignore my personal needs. To overcome this weakness, I now try to emphasize creating time in my schedule to spend with my family. Small changes, such as putting my phone on silent, have made a huge difference. Having more balance in my life between work and leisure makes me more productive at work. And the final example I'll give you, I sometimes lack confidence. My greatest weakness, it says, is that I sometimes lack confidence, which is why I have difficulty speaking up in groups. Even if I have great ideas, I have difficulty sharing them with others. For this reason, I decided that it was time to take speaking and acting classes. These classes help me to learn to separate my shy self from my professional self. So that's all bits from, what was it? I've forgotten already. Indeed.com, that one. And the reason I forgot is I'm going on to a few more examples, just one-off examples from strengthsandweaknesses.com. Quite an interesting site that I found when I was researching it. So here's a whole host of possible weaknesses you might not have considered from there. Not taking criticism well, impatience, laziness, easily bored, procrastination, persistence, taking things personally, being strong-willed, being too passive, not liking conflict, being too shy, being lethargic, not good at long-term planning, too strict, short-sighted, selfish, focusing on the small details. Now, I did do a show fairly recently called The Devil's in the Detail, but I think they're talking about getting bogged down in it to such a point where you don't complete what you're doing, and that was never the idea of that show. But focusing on small details could be regarded as a weakness or a strength. Taking blame for others, and I've done that myself on occasion and sometimes regretted it, not always, but that's a thing. Anyway, being straightforward, being greedy, delegating tasks, too many tasks, needing to be right, needing always to be right. I mean, how many people do you know that need to be right, especially in this modern age of social media, etc.? Stubbornness, multitasking. Multitasking is a weakness. You know, you want to focus on one thing, productivity. You want to go not on 10 things at one time. You want to do one thing at a time, knock it off, move on to the next thing. You're going to get more done quicker, and you're going to learn from the cycle of productivity, which I spoke about. Was that last week's episode? Could have been. Or the week before. What else? Allows emotions to show, too emotional, wearing your heart on your sleeve, bluntness, presenting. I'm not sure what presenting is. Answers on a postcard. Please feel free to jump onto social media and say what that might mean. Impulsiveness, bossiness, taking on too much. That's kind of the same as not saying no enough. Following up on things, being too aggressive, taking too many risks, very critical of others, too passive, working too much, perfectionism, fearfulness, self-criticism, trouble with teams, being close-minded, being unorganized, or does not like pressure. That's the full list that they had on strengthsandweaknesses.com. Is it My Strengths and Weaknesses? Hold on. MyStrengthsandWeaknesses.com it's actually called. In most cases, strengths and weaknesses are two sides of the same coin. A strength in one situation is a weakness in another. Yet often the person can't switch gears. It's a very subtle thing to talk about strengths and weaknesses because almost always they're the same thing. Steve Jobs, unquote. Now, I'm not going to cover it fully here, but you would be well served to also create a list of your strengths. These may be derived from your personal skills such as ambition, honesty, integrity, creativity, etc. Your transferable skills, things like being a team player, good communications, writing skills, or being well organized, or your knowledge-based skills, as I mentioned before, things like editing would be one of those things, or other things maybe that are accounting or marketing or photography. Your top three are most likely your bread and butter of these skills. More than likely, they're how you earn a living. They are the strengths you have no matter what the job environment is. But let me come back to the listing of your weaknesses. This is an exercise in self-assessment that you might not have done before, but analysing your weaknesses and developing your awareness of them will allow you to act upon improving them or on building upon your strengths in order to counter them. And you know I'm a stickler for finding names that are difficult to pronounce when I've got a quote, but Paramahansa Yogananda explains, I got there, that millions of people never analyse themselves. Mentally, they are mechanical products of the factory of their environment, preoccupied with breakfast, lunch and dinner, working and sleeping, and going here and there to be entertained. They don't know what or why they are seeking, nor why they never realise complete happiness and lasting satisfaction. By evading self-analysis, people go on being robots, conditioned by their environment. True self-analysis is the greatest art of progress, unquote. So before I sum up on all this, I need to say that, like all things productivity related, there is no point in identifying your weaknesses if you do not put your solutions to resolve them into action. So whatever plans you have decided upon to counteract them must be acted upon. And that brings me back to yet another quote from Peter Drucker, who said, "The problem in my life and other people's lives is not the absence of knowing what to do, but the absence of doing it." So choose 3 of the weaknesses that you've listed and think about how you can counteract them using your strengths, or if they're knowledge-based weaknesses, what you can do to beat them or learn your way out of them. Personally, I'm using video learning and test shoots to learn about editing, grading, and sound mixing, and I'm taking a leaf out of last week's book too and associating myself with people who know more about those topics than I do and who are very talented in those fields. I've already dealt with many weaknesses since starting on this show, years ago, perhaps most successfully in my ability to say no to things that I don't want to do, that won't further my career or my dreams, and also get over my fear, as another thing I can think of that I've definitely solved, of discussing financial matters openly with employers who are very often trying to play the old "we don't have much money" routine. If you're a freelancer, you'll have heard that one plenty of times. But believe you me, my days of subsidizing mainstream television and film with greatly reduced rates, I mean stupidly reduced rates you might say, are well behind me. These might all sound like small things, irrelevant things to you, but by identifying your weaknesses and putting into action plans for countering them, you will set yourself directly back on the path of success. That's what the show is about. It's about productivity and success. This is a simple exercise you can do to identify your weaknesses that you might not have considered. Choose 3 of them and start taking action to counter them. Got it? It's great to be introspective. Self-analysis can be useful, but only if it results in action. Joe Sacco, unquote. In next week's show, I'll be offering up 10 of my thoughts on, well, I've got written down here social media. I might broaden it a little bit to the internet and possibly a little bit of social media marketing as well, but really from a productivity perspective. There's possibly some stuff in there that you might learn. I think it's worth me getting out of my head and into an episode, so look out for that one. In the meantime, though, I'm going to end with some more words from Peter Drucker, who said, "We can't make people better by trying to eliminate their weaknesses, but we can help them to perform better by building on their strengths." Now take control of your own destiny, keep on shooting, and join me next time on Film Pro Productivity and Success. The music that you're listening to right now is Adventures by Ehimitsu, and the executive producer for this season is Christopher McPhillips from Artos Digital. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com, and you can also follow my personal accounts, if you've got a minute, on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or please follow the show on Twitter at filmproprodpod or on Facebook at filmproproductivity. Please, folks, continue to support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.